The polished marble floor of the Henderson estate reflected the light of a dozen chandeliers, each one a glittering galaxy of crystal and gold. It was a house built to broadcast success, to intimidate with its sheer, unapologetic opulence. Liam Sterling felt like a foreign object within it, a simple stone placed among diamonds. He held a glass of sparkling water, the tiny bubbles rising in a silent, indifferent fizz. Across the grand ballroom, his wife Chloe was a vision in emerald silk, her laughter a bright, sharp sound that cut through the murmur of the party. She was standing with Julian Thorne, her ex-boyfriend, a man who seemed sculpted from wealth itself. They were close, their bodies angled toward each other, creating a private world in the middle of 100 people. Liam watched, his face a carefully composed mask of placid neutrality. He had perfected that mask over the last 14 months. It was a necessary piece of armor. He saw Julian lean in, his voice a low rumble. He saw Chloe's expressions shift, a flicker of conspiracy, of shared intimacy that excluded him entirely. And then, carried on a current of air, he heard her words. They were not meant for him, but they found him all the same, as precisely as a guided missile. "Please, Julian," she'd said, a dismissive little laugh coloring her tone. "He has no idea." The words landed in the quiet of Liam's soul and detonated. The sound of the party faded. The glittering lights blurred. In that single moment, the vague unease he had lived with for years crystallized into a terrible, diamond-hard certainty. He has no idea. He had no idea of their continued intimacy. He had no idea he was a placeholder, a comfortable but ultimately inadequate fixture in her life. He had no idea he was a subject of pity and condescension between his own wife and her former lover. But they were the ones who had no idea. They saw a quiet, unassuming architect, a man content with small projects and a modest life. They saw a man grateful to have married into the wealthy Henderson family, a man who should be thankful for the roof over his head, a roof they owned. They didn't see the man who, for 14 long months, had been meticulously, patiently, and silently drawing up a blueprint for a new world, a world that did not include them. What they mistook for weakness was patience. What they saw as contentment was strategy. And their arrogance, their blinding, glittering arrogance, was the foundation upon which he would build their ruin. This party, this night, was not the beginning of his humiliation. It was the beginning of their end. The final invoice for years of disrespect was about to be delivered. Before we dive into the full story of how Liam Sterling orchestrated one of the most satisfying reversals of fortune imaginable, we want to welcome you. We're so glad you're here with us today. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And if you enjoy stories about the underestimated finally claiming their power, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the drama. Now let's go back 14 months to a quiet dinner that planted the first bitter seed. The dining room table was a vast expanse of polished mahogany, a dark, reflective lake separating Liam from his father-in-law, Richard Henderson. Richard was the patriarch of the family, a man whose presence filled any room with a heavy, oppressive atmosphere of judgment and expectation. He had a way of looking at Liam that felt like an audit, as if he were constantly calculating Liam's worth and finding it wanting. Chloe sat between them, a silent moderator in a conflict she refused to acknowledge. "I saw the plans for the Reynolds extension," Richard began, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. The statement hung in the air, not as a compliment, but as an indictment. "Charming, very quaint." The word quaint was delivered with surgical precision, designed to diminish. It was the word one used for a dollhouse, not a serious architectural endeavor. Liam felt Chloe shift beside him, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement of discomfort. But she said nothing. Her silence was a familiar character in these dinners, a ghost at the table. "The Reynolds were happy with it," Liam replied, his voice even. He met Richard's gaze across the mahogany expanse. The goal was to integrate with the original Victorian structure, not to overpower it. It's about harmony, not just scale. Richard let out a short, humorless laugh. Harmony doesn't pay the bills, Liam. Scale does. Ambition does. Julian's firm just broke ground on the new waterfront development. 3 towers, commercial and residential. That's ambition. That's a legacy. The mention of Julian was inevitable. He was Richard's favorite instrument of comparison, the golden yardstick against which Liam was always measured and always found short. Chloe's eyes flickered downward, studying the intricate pattern on her plate. She hated it when her father did this, yet she never once asked him to stop. Her failure to defend him was a wound deeper than any of Richard's verbal jabs. It was a betrayal by 1,000 silent cuts. Julian is a very successful developer, Liam conceded, his calmness a stark contrast to the simmering aggression in Richard's tone. My work is in a different sphere. I'm an architect, not a developer. I'm focused on the integrity of individual designs. Integrity, Richard scoffed, savoring the word as if it were a cheap wine. A noble concept for a man who can't afford to buy his wife a new car. Chloe's Mercedes is nearly 5 years old. It's embarrassing. This was the pattern. The conversation always circled back to money, to what Liam couldn't provide. The house they lived in was a wedding gift from Richard, a constant, unspoken reminder of Liam's dependency. The cars, the vacations, the life Chloe was accustomed to, it was all underwritten by Henderson wealth. Liam was, in their eyes, a kept man. I'm sorry you feel that way, Richard, Liam said, his voice quiet but firm. My income is sufficient for our needs. We live comfortably. Comfortably? Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The pretense of civility was gone. My daughter is not meant to live comfortably. She is meant to live exceptionally. I provide that for her because you cannot. Do you understand the difference? Liam looked at Chloe. Her jaw was tight, a faint flush on her cheeks. She was trapped between the father she revered and the husband she refused to champion. He saw the conflict in her eyes, but he also saw the choice she made, over and over again, the choice of silence, the choice of her father's approval over her husband's dignity. Later that night, the silence in their car on the way home was heavier than the mahogany table. Chloe stared out the passenger window, the city lights flashing across her face, illuminating the stern set of her mouth. You know how he is, she finally said, her voice thin. It wasn't an apology. It was an expectation of his understanding. I do, Liam said softly. I also know that he is your father. A simple, that's enough, Dad, would go a long way. She turned to him, her eyes flashing with defensiveness. And what would that accomplish? It would just create a scene. You know how he gets. It's easier to just let him say his piece and let it go. Easier for you, Liam thought, but he didn't say it. The words would only lead to a fight, and a fight would resolve nothing. The problem wasn't Richard's cruelty. It was Chloe's complicity. She didn't see his quiet endurance as strength. She saw it as proof that he was, in fact, weak enough to deserve the criticism. Back in his home office, the tension of the evening began to slough off him like a heavy coat. This room was his sanctuary. It was modest, filled with books on structural engineering and design theory, rolls of blueprints, and the scent of graphite and paper. To Chloe, it was the room where her husband tinkered with his little projects. She had no idea that this room was the command center for an empire. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. The screen illuminated his face, casting it in a cool, blue light. He dismissed a dozen emails from contractors and city planners, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Then he opened the file. On the screen, a breathtaking structure bloomed into existence. It wasn't a quaint home extension. It was a city within a city, a trio of soaring, interconnected towers that seemed to defy gravity, their crystalline facades twisting towards the sky. The Ethelgard Project. His vision, his company, his secret. For the past 5 years, while playing the part of a small-time architect, Liam had been the silent, anonymous founder and chief designer of Ethelgard Consortium, a boutique firm that specialized in bleeding-edge, sustainable architecture. His partner, Marcus Thorne, no relation to Julian, a fact of delicious irony, handled the public-facing CEO duties. Liam preferred the shadows. He valued the purity of the work over the performance of success. His name was known only to a handful of investors and the highest echelons of the architectural world. To the rest of the world, including his own wife, he was just Liam Sterling, a man of small ambitions. His personal fortune, derived from two massive projects in Dubai and Singapore, was managed through a series of labyrinthine trusts and holding companies, making it virtually invisible. He hadn't hidden his success to deceive Chloe, not at first. He had wanted her to love him for who he was, not for what he had. He'd imagined a day when he would reveal it all to her, a grand romantic gesture. But as the years went on and her casual disrespect grew, the secret had changed. It was no longer a gift in waiting, it had become a weapon. He reached for a simple, worn leather journal on his desk. It was his most important tool, more valuable than any software. Chloe thought it was just a sketchbook. She had no idea it contained the meticulous architecture of his revenge. He opened it to a fresh page. The paper was thick, creamy. He picked up his favorite fountain pen, its weight familiar and comforting in his hand. At the top of the page he wrote the date. Then he began to write. Item: Dinner with Richard. Subject: My professional inadequacy. Key phrases: quaint. Harmony doesn't pay the bills. Embarrassing. Chloe's response? Silence. He documented it all with the dispassionate precision of an engineer analyzing structural fatigue. Each insult, each slight, each moment of silent betrayal was a data point. He was building a case. He was designing a demolition. And as he wrote, the hurt from the dinner began to fade, replaced by a cold, clear focus. Richard and Chloe thought they were defining his reality. They had no idea he was the one writing the script. The weeks that followed the dinner at Richard's settled into a familiar, tense rhythm. Liam moved through his days with a placid exterior, giving Chloe and her family no reason to suspect that anything had changed. He continued to work on his local projects, submitting plans for home renovations and small commercial buildings, maintaining the facade of a man of limited scope. He was polite at family gatherings, enduring Richard's casual condescension and Chloe's growing distance with a quiet dignity that they consistently misinterpreted as weakness. They didn't see the other Liam, the one who emerged late at night in the solitude of his office. They didn't see the man who conducted encrypted video calls with a team of lawyers in Zurich, structuring the final phase of a complex financial maneuver. They didn't see him reviewing geotechnical surveys for a plot of land in London that his consortium was acquiring under a shell corporation. They didn't see the ghost in the machine, the architect of a reality they couldn't even begin to imagine. The invitation to Richard's 70th birthday party arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope, the calligraphy a testament to the expense and importance of the event. It was to be held at the Henderson estate, a grand affair for 200 of their closest friends and business associates. Liam knew Julian would be there. He always was. Julian had become a permanent fixture in their lives, the ghost of Chloe's past that she refused to exorcise. The night of the party was a masterpiece of Henderson ostentation. A string quartet played softly in the foyer. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate canapes. The air hummed with the sound of money, of power, of people who knew their place in the world and were confident it was at the very top. Liam, dressed in a perfectly tailored but understated dark suit, felt the familiar sense of dislocation. He was an observer, a silent witness to a life he was adjacent to, but not truly a part of. Chloe was radiant, moving through the crowd with an easy grace, accepting compliments on her dress, on the party, on her life. She was in her element. He was not. Early in the evening, Richard cornered him near the grand staircase. He had a proprietary arm around Liam's shoulder, a gesture that looked friendly but felt like an assertion of ownership. "Liam," he said, his voice a low, confidential boom, "I've been thinking about you, about your career." Liam waited. He knew this preamble. It was always the precursor to an insult wrapped in the guise of an opportunity. "This architecture thing, it's a fine hobby," Richard continued, patting his shoulder. "But a man needs a real profession, a path for advancement. I have an opening in our logistics department, assistant regional manager. It's not glorious, but it's a steady paycheck, a foot in the door of a real business. I'm willing to offer it to you, for Chloe's sake, of course." The offer was breathtaking in its condescension. Assistant regional manager, a man with a master's degree in architecture, the hidden genius behind the Ethelgard Consortium, was being offered a mid-level corporate job out of pity. It was a test of his subservience, a demand that he finally admit his own failure and accept his place in the Henderson hierarchy. Liam maintained his calm expression, the mask firmly in place. "That's a very generous offer, Richard," he said, his voice perfectly level. "But I'm committed to my path. I believe it has potential." Richard's smile tightened. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even a fawning acceptance. Liam's polite refusal was an unexpected act of defiance. "Potential doesn't put food on the table, son. My money does. Don't forget that." He gave Liam's shoulder one last, bruising squeeze and moved off into the crowd, his displeasure a palpable force. Liam took a deep breath, the air thick with perfume and privilege. He needed a moment of quiet. He made his way toward the bar at the far end of the ballroom, navigating the clusters of laughing, champagne-sipping guests. The bar was busy, so he drifted toward the edge of the room, finding a small alcove partially concealed by a massive, 7-foot-tall arrangement of white orchids and lilies. It was a pocket of relative solitude. And then he heard her voice. Chloe's laugh, bright and familiar. She was just on the other side of the floral display, her back to him. And with her, of course, was Julian. Liam froze, hidden by the wall of petals and leaves. He hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but he was pinned by the intimacy of their tone. "He's being particularly awful tonight," Chloe was saying, and Liam knew she was talking about her father. "He just offered Liam a job in logistics. I could have died." "The man has no subtlety," Julian replied, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. Liam could picture his smug, handsome face. "But you have to admit it's hard to watch. A man with your vitality tied to someone so static." There was a pause. Liam held his breath. He could feel his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. "He's a good man, Julian," Chloe said, but her voice lacked conviction. It was the defense one offered for a pet, not a partner. "Is he?" Julian pressed. "Or is he just safe? Convenient? Does he have any idea how much you and I still talk? Does he know what we share?" The question was a baited hook, and Chloe swam right for it. Liam braced himself. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a scene in a play, a drama in which he was the unwitting subject. And then came the line that would echo in his memory for the next year, the line that ended his marriage. Chloe laughed, a sound that was both dismissive and conspiratorial. "Please, Julian, he has no idea." The world tilted on its axis. In the space of those 5 words, every doubt, every suspicion, every quiet hurt of the past few years coalesced into a single, unbearable point of pressure. It wasn't just about Julian. It was about everything. It was the confirmation that in his own wife's eyes, he was a fool, oblivious, unworthy of even the basic respect of honesty. He was a non-entity in his own life, a piece of furniture that she and Julian could talk over. The hurt was a physical blow, a fist to the gut that stole his breath. But beneath the pain, something else ignited. A fire. Not a hot, raging fire of anger, but a cold, blue flame of pure, unadulterated resolve. This was not a wound he would simply nurse. This was a declaration of war. He would not be the fool in this story. He stepped silently away from the floral arrangement, his movements fluid and unseen. He walked back through the glittering party, his mask of calm so perfect, so absolute, that it was no longer a mask. It was the face of a man who had found his purpose. He found Chloe a few minutes later, laughing at something Julian had said. She glanced at him, her eyes holding a flicker of guilt, quickly suppressed. "Oh, there you are," she said, as if she just noticed his absence. "Having a good time?" "A wonderful time," Liam replied, his voice smooth as silk. He met her gaze, and for a fleeting second, he let her see behind the mask. He let her see the cold fire in his eyes. He saw a flicker of confusion, of unease in her expression, but she dismissed it, turning back to Julian. It was the last time she would ever have the luxury of dismissing him. That night, when they returned to the house she thought her father owned, Liam went to his office. He opened his leather journal. He wrote down the date, the setting, and the conversation. Then he drew a thick, definitive line under the entry. The data collection phase was over. The design phase had begun. The project timeline, demolition in 14 months. The 14 months that followed were a masterclass in emotional compartmentalization. To the outside world, and especially to Chloe, Liam Sterling became even more placid, more accommodating. The overt tension that had sometimes crackled between them seemed to dissipate, and Chloe, in her self-absorption, mistook this for his final, resigned acceptance of his place. She believed his spirit was finally broken. She had no idea it was being forged into a weapon. His days were a study in duality. By morning, he was the local architect, meeting with clients about kitchen remodels and garage conversions. He would listen patiently, sketch ideas on his notepad, and discuss budgets in the low tens of thousands. He played the part so perfectly that even he sometimes felt the strange whiplash of his double life. He would leave a meeting about choosing bathroom tiles and get into his modest car, only to take a call on his encrypted phone with the lead structural engineer for the Ethelgard project, discussing the tensile strength of a new carbon fiber composite for a building that would cost more than the entire town he was currently in. His nights were dedicated to the plan. His leather journal, once a place to document grievances, now became a strategic Bible. It was filled with timelines, legal frameworks, and financial diagrams. He operated like a general planning a silent invasion. Phase 1 was asset consolidation. Working with his legal team in Zurich, he began the slow, methodical process of disentangling his personal wealth from the Ethelgard Consortium's corporate structure. He created a new, deeply buried personal holding company, Sterling Legacy Holdings, a name chosen with a grim sense of irony. Billions were moved through a series of shadowy transactions, flowing from Dubai and Singapore through Cayman Island accounts, finally settling in a place so secure and so anonymous that not even the most determined forensic accountant could trace it back to him without the key. Phase 2 was intelligence gathering. He hired a discreet private investigation firm, not to spy on Chloe, he already knew the essential truth of her infidelity, but to conduct a thorough financial and ethical audit of Henderson Industries, Richard's company. He wanted to know everything, every leveraged asset, every overextended line of credit, every questionable deal. The reports that came back were better than he could have hoped. Richard's company, while appearing robust, was a house of cards, built on aggressive debt and a few key investors who were getting nervous about Richard's increasingly erratic leadership. Phase 3 was the acquisition of key assets. The first was the house. Chloe and Richard believed the house was a gift, held in a Henderson family trust. This was true for the first year of their marriage. But Liam, in a moment of foresight he was now profoundly grateful for, had insisted on buying it from the trust 2 years prior as a symbolic gesture of his commitment. He had used his own hidden funds, routing them through a blind trust that Richard's own lawyers had set up and promptly forgotten about. The deed, clean and absolute, was in Liam's name alone. It was stored in a safe deposit box, a time bomb waiting to explode. He cataloged every gift, every expense. The 5-year-old Mercedes that Richard found so embarrassing was leased, but the lease was in Liam's name, paid for by his personal account, not Henderson money. The jewelry he'd given Chloe, the art on their walls, all of it was meticulously documented. He was creating a clear, unassailable line between his life and theirs. Throughout this period, Chloe's behavior grew bolder. Convinced of Liam's obliviousness, her phone calls with Julian became more frequent, her excuses for late nights more flimsy. She treated Liam with a kind of weary, affectionate pity, the way one treats an old dog that has lost its spirit. She would pat his arm and say, "You work so hard on your little drawings," her voice laced with a condescension she no longer bothered to hide. Each of these moments Liam recorded in his journal, not with anger, but with a chilling detachment. October 12th. Chloe forgets our anniversary dinner. Spends the evening with friends. Phone records confirm 2-hour call with Julian Thorne. November 3rd. Richard mocks my proposal for the community library, calling it charity work for a man who needs it. Chloe laughs. The list grew. It was a testament to 1,000 small deaths, a catalog of disrespect that would serve as his justification. He was not just seeking a divorce, he was seeking justice, poetic justice. The final piece of his plan began to take shape about 10 months in. Chloe and her father were in the early stages of planning the annual Henderson Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of their social calendar. It was a massive event that raised millions for charities of Richard's choosing, and more importantly, cemented the Henderson name as a pillar of the community. One evening, Chloe approached him in his office. She had a file in her hands and an expression of magnanimous purpose. "Liam, darling," she began, her tone syrupy, "Dad and I were talking. The theme for the gala this year is Building the Future. And we thought, who better to help us with the design?" Liam looked up from his desk, his face a mask of neutral inquiry. "The design?" "For the venue," she said, as if it were obvious. "The ballroom at the Grand Hotel is so dated. We want to transform it, make it feel modern, visionary. We thought it would be a wonderful opportunity for you." He waited for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. "Of course, it's for the foundation, so there's no budget for a designer's fee," she added quickly. "But it would be incredible exposure for you. Your name in the program, a chance to show people what you can do on a grander scale. We'd be happy to mention your firm in the acknowledgments." The offer was a perfect encapsulation of their view of him, a man so desperate for scraps of recognition that he would leap at the chance to do thousands of dollars of work for free, just for a pat on the head. They weren't just asking for free labor, they were framing it as a life-altering favor. "I see," Liam said slowly, his mind racing. An idea, brilliant and terrible, began to form. This was it. This was the stage. They were handing him the very tools he needed to complete his work. "You want a design that feels ambitious?" "Exactly," Chloe beamed, relieved at his apparent compliance. "Something bold. Think Julian's waterfront project, glass and steel and light. Something that says power." "I think I can do that," Liam said, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips for a fraction of a second. "Yes, I think I can design something truly unforgettable for you." Chloe, blinded by her own arrogance, saw only her husband's eager submission. She had no idea that when he said unforgettable, he meant it literally. He wasn't just going to design a ballroom, he was designing a courtroom, a stage for a public execution, and they had just handed him the blueprints. The weeks leading up to the Henderson Foundation Gala were a blur of controlled chaos for Liam. By day, he was the diligent, unpaid volunteer, meeting with the hotel's event staff, lighting technicians, and sound engineers. He presented Chloe and Richard with stunning, photorealistic renderings of a transformed ballroom. He had designed a space that was both elegant and dramatic. A raised central stage was backed by a massive, state-of-the-art LED screen. Sleek, minimalist podiums were positioned at key points. The acoustics were re-engineered, ensuring that a single voice could carry, crisp and clear, to every corner of the room. Richard was impressed, in his own backhanded way. "I'll admit, Liam, this is better than I expected," he grunted, looking over the plans. "Perhaps there's a future for you in party planning." Chloe had simply nodded, pleased that the aesthetic would reflect well on her. They saw a beautiful room. Liam saw a perfectly calibrated trap. By night, he was finalizing the endgame. He had a series of clandestine meetings with Marcus Thorne, his partner. Their meetings took place in anonymous hotel conference rooms, far from the prying eyes of the world Liam inhabited with Chloe. Marcus, a sharp, energetic man with a brilliant legal and financial mind, had been Liam's staunchest ally from the beginning. He was one of the few people who knew the full story of Liam's marriage. "The timing is critical, Liam," Marcus said, pointing to a date on a calendar in their penultimate meeting. "The announcement for the Sky Arch project has to be synchronized to the minute. The press releases are queued up. The interviews with the Financial Times and Wall Street Journal are embargoed until exactly 9:15 p.m. on the night of the gala." "And the Henderson Industries portfolio?" Liam asked, his voice low. Marcus grinned, a flash of predatory satisfaction in his eyes. "It's beautiful. We've been buying up their debt through a third-party entity for 6 months. Richard thinks he's been dealing with a Singaporean investment fund. As of last week, we are his single largest creditor. When his primary investor pulls out, which my contact confirms will happen the morning of the gala, he'll be in breach of his loan covenants. We'll own him." Liam nodded slowly, a grim sense of finality settling over him. It was a ruthless plan, but his heart was cold and steady. Mercy was a luxury his antagonist had never afforded him. "The house, the papers, the final details, it's all ready?" Marcus slid a thick, elegant envelope across the table. "Divorce petition, filed this morning. A copy of the deed to your house. A 6-month lease agreement for a new apartment for Chloe, fully paid. New keys, everything you need. It's all in here." Liam picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, weighted with the history of his marriage and the finality of its end. This would be his symbolic object for the final act. For months, it had been the leather journal, the repository of his pain and his plans. Now it was this envelope, the instrument of their execution. "Are you ready for this, my friend?" Marcus asked, his tone softening. "This is going to be a firestorm." Liam looked at his partner, the man who had helped him build an empire in secret. "They built the fire, Marcus. I'm just going to make sure they're standing in the center of it when the whole thing goes up." The day of the gala arrived, a cool, crisp autumn evening. The city was aglow, but a sense of foreboding hung in the air, a quiet before the storm that only Liam could feel. He stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom, adjusting his black bow tie. He wore a custom-made tuxedo, sharper and more expensive than anything he had ever worn in Chloe's presence. It was a suit of armor for the battle to come. Chloe entered the room, a whirlwind of perfume and shimmering fabric. She was wearing a breathtaking gown of midnight blue, dripping with diamonds. She looked like a queen. "How do I look?" she asked, striking a pose. "Incredible," Liam said, and he meant it. She was beautiful, a beautiful, hollow thing. The thought brought him no joy, only a profound and weary sadness for the man he had been, the man who had loved her so completely. "You clean up nicely yourself," she said, giving him a quick, appraising glance. "Try not to look so serious tonight, okay? It's a party. Smile a little." She patted his cheek and swept out of the room, leaving him alone with his reflection. He smiled then, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. He slipped the thick envelope from Marcus into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. It lay against his heart, a cool, rectangular weight. He was ready. The Grand Hotel ballroom was everything he had designed it to be, a symphony of light and shadow, of modern elegance and dramatic potential. The guests, a glittering assembly of the city's elite, murmured their approval. "The Hendersons have outdone themselves," he heard someone say. "This room is spectacular." No one mentioned the architect. He was, as always, invisible. He moved through the evening with a preternatural calm. He spoke to people he knew, nodded politely to those he didn't. He watched Chloe holding court, with Julian once again a magnetic presence at her side. He saw Richard, expansive and triumphant, accepting accolades for his foundation's work and, by extension, for his own unimpeachable success. They were at the absolute zenith of their world, confident and unassailable. Liam found a quiet spot near the back, nursing a glass of water, and watched the clock. At 8:45 p.m., Richard took to the central stage, stepping up to the main podium. A hush fell over the crowd. "My dear friends, welcome," Richard began, his voice booming through the perfectly tuned speakers Liam had specified. "Welcome to an evening of hope, an evening of generosity, an evening of building the future." A polite smattering of applause. Richard launched into a long, self-congratulatory speech about the importance of giving back, about the legacy of the Henderson name. Liam listened, his expression unreadable. He felt strangely detached, as if he were an audience member watching the first act of a well-rehearsed play. He knew all the lines. He knew exactly where the plot was going. Finally, Richard began to wind down. "None of this would be possible without the support of my family. My incredible daughter, Chloe, whose passion for this work is an inspiration." He beamed at Chloe, who preened under the spotlight. Then, as a final, thoughtless flourish, he gestured vaguely toward the back of the room. "And I should also offer a small thank you to my son-in-law, Liam, for his help with the lovely decorations tonight. It's wonderful when everyone can contribute in their own way." The faint praise was a perfectly delivered insult, positioning Liam as a helpful hobbyist. A few people chuckled politely. Liam's face remained a blank canvas. He watched Chloe join her father on stage to a round of enthusiastic applause. She approached the podium, ready to deliver her own speech. This was his cue. As Chloe began to speak, her voice echoing through the hall, Liam did not move toward the stage. Instead, he walked calmly, deliberately, to a small, unassuming technical booth set into the side wall of the ballroom. A booth that was not on the original floor plan. A booth he had added, insisting it was for managing the lighting and presentation overrides. The technician inside, a man on Liam's personal payroll, saw him coming and discreetly opened the door. Inside, a small control panel glowed in the dark. It included a microphone feed, independent of the main stage podium, and a direct link to the massive LED screen. Liam took a deep breath. The quiet of the booth was a stark contrast to the sound of Chloe's voice outside. He looked at the technician, a young man named David. "Is everything ready?" Liam asked. David nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Everything is queued up, Mr. Sterling. The press release feeds, the audio channels, all on your mark." Liam put on a small, discreet earpiece. He could hear Marcus's voice, calm and steady, from a command center they had set up in a suite upstairs. "5 seconds, Liam. Stage is yours." Liam took the secondary microphone, a sleek, silver device. He pressed the button to activate it. Outside, Chloe was in the middle of a sentence. "And it is with that spirit of building that we look to a future where everyone has a foundation for—" Her voice was suddenly cut off. The main podium microphone went dead. A single, pure tone hummed through the speakers for a second, drawing every eye in the room. There was a moment of confused silence. Heads turned, searching for the source of the interruption. Then, a new voice filled the room. It was not booming or angry. It was calm, clear, and perfectly amplified. It was Liam's voice. "Thank you, Chloe. That's enough." Every head in the room swiveled toward the sidewall, where Liam now stood, framed in the doorway of the tech booth, the microphone in his hand. Chloe froze, her mouth half open. Richard, standing beside her, looked utterly bewildered, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. Julian, standing near the front of the stage, stared, his confident smirk wiped clean from his face. Liam took a slow, deliberate step out of the booth and began to walk toward the stage. He didn't take the stairs. He walked along the floor, forcing the audience to turn and follow his progress. He was no longer an invisible man. He was the center of gravity, and the entire room was being pulled into his orbit. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice as smooth as polished stone. He stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at his wife and her father, who were now trapped in the spotlight, looking down at him with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "My father-in-law was kind enough to thank me for the decorations, but I'm afraid my contribution tonight is a little more substantial than that. I designed this room. I designed the lighting. I designed the acoustics. I designed this very moment." The crowd murmured, a wave of confusion and intrigue rippling through them. This was not on the program. This was something new, something dangerous. Richard spoke about building the future, Liam continued, his eyes locked on his father-in-law. "It's a subject I know a little something about. It requires a strong foundation, and a foundation, as any architect will tell you, must be built on truth, on solid ground, not on lies, not on secrets." He turned his gaze to Chloe. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She was beginning to understand that this was not a simple interruption. This was an insurrection. "My wife Chloe also spoke of foundations," Liam said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, yet still carrying to every corner of the room. "So I'd like to talk about the foundation of our marriage. A partnership is supposed to be a structure built by two people, based on mutual respect, honesty, and trust." He paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. He took a step closer to the stage, a predator closing in. "But our foundation was flawed from the beginning. It was built on a lie. The lie that I was not good enough. The lie that I was weak. The lie that I needed the Henderson name, the Henderson money, to survive." He began to walk along the edge of the stage, his eyes scanning the front rows, where the most powerful people in the city sat, their faces rapt. "For years I have endured the quiet humiliations, the condescending remarks, the constant corrosive disrespect. I was offered a pity job in logistics. My work, my passion, was called a hobby. My inability to buy a new Mercedes for my wife was deemed embarrassing." He recited the insults calmly, factually, without a trace of self-pity. He was not asking for sympathy, he was presenting evidence. It was the moral mirror, and he was forcing Richard and Chloe to look at their own reflections, distorted by their cruelty. Richard's face was now a mask of pure rage. He started to say something, but Liam's voice cut through him. "I accepted it all with silence," Liam said, "and my silence was mistaken for acceptance. My patience was mistaken for weakness." He stopped directly in front of Chloe. He looked up at her, and his voice was soft, almost a whisper, but the microphone carried it to everyone. And then came the moment of perfect clarity. 14 months ago, at your father's 70th birthday party, you were standing with Julian Thorne, right over there. He gestured with the microphone toward the spot where the floral arrangement had been. "And he asked if I knew about your relationship, and you laughed. You said, 'Please, he has no idea.'" A collective gasp went through the room. It was a shocking, intimate revelation, laid bare for 200 people to witness. Chloe flinched as if he had physically struck her. Her eyes filled with tears of panic, not remorse. "But you were wrong, Chloe." Liam's voice hardened, losing its soft edge, becoming as sharp as broken glass. You were all wrong. You had no idea that I heard you. You had no idea that your disrespect was not a burden I would carry, but a debt you would have to repay. You had no idea who I really am, and you have no idea what I have done. With a final dramatic turn, he gestured to the massive LED screen behind the stage. But you're about to find out. The screen, which had been displaying the Henderson Foundation logo, flickered and went black. The room held its breath. For a heart-stopping second, there was only darkness and silence. Then the screen flooded with light. It wasn't a video or a slideshow. It was the unmistakable masthead of the Wall Street Journal, the digital front page, time-stamped just moments ago. The headline was enormous, dominating the screen. A Thelgard consortium, helmed by mysterious architect Liam Sterling, secures final funding for $4.2 billion. Sky Arch Global Headquarters. Below the headline was a stunning rendering of the project, the very same structure from Liam's laptop, a masterpiece of architectural ambition that dwarfed anything Julian Thorne's firm had ever conceived. And next to it, a professional headshot of Liam. Not the quiet, unassuming man they thought they knew, but a face of confidence, vision, and power. A wave of shock rolled through the ballroom. Phones came out, fingers frantically typing his name, his company's name. The story was real. It was everywhere. Julian Thorne, standing near the stage, looked as if he had seen a ghost. His face, normally a picture of smug self-assurance, was ashen. The foundation of his own arrogance had just crumbled to dust. As the guests were still processing the impossible revelation, the main doors of the ballroom swung open. A group of men in dark, impeccably tailored suits entered. At their head was Marcus Thorne, his face set with grim purpose. They were not guests, they were a corporate raiding party. Marcus strode confidently through the stunned crowd, walked up the stage steps, and stood beside Liam, a silent, powerful affirmation of everything the screen proclaimed. Liam let the shock settle for a moment longer. He looked at Richard, whose face had gone from red rage to a sickly, mottled gray. He looked at Chloe, who was staring at the screen, then at Liam, then back at the screen, her mind refusing to connect the two realities. "The Ethelgard Consortium is my company," Liam announced, his voice ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from him before. "I founded it 7 years ago. The quaint projects I worked on locally were a cover, a way for me to stay grounded in the principles of my craft, while my real work spanned the globe. The man you thought was a failure has a net worth that could buy and sell Henderson Industries 10 times over." He turned his attention fully to Richard. "Speaking of which, Henderson Industries, a proud company, or at least it was. But you over-leveraged, Richard. You got greedy, and for the last 6 months, my consortium has been quietly acquiring your debt. As of 9 a.m. this morning, when your largest investor pulled out, you defaulted on your covenants. As of 9:30 a.m., Ethelgard Consortium purchased your entire debt portfolio. We own you, Richard. My lawyers," he gestured to Marcus's team, "will be in touch on Monday to discuss the terms of your company's dissolution." Richard swayed on his feet, his hand gripping the podium for support. He looked like a man who had been shot. The work of his life, the legacy of his name, evaporated in a single public announcement. Then Liam turned to Chloe. His voice lost its hard, corporate edge and became something far more devastating, quiet and final. "And then there is the matter of our home," he said softly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the thick, elegant envelope. The entire room was fixated on it. "You and your father always believed you were providing for me. You loved the power it gave you, the constant reminder of my supposed dependency. But you were living in my house, Chloe." He held up a document from the envelope, the deed. "I bought the house from your father's trust 2 years ago. It is in my name, and my name alone. The car you drive is leased in my name. The art, the furniture, it's all mine. I was never a kept man. I was an undercover landlord. The finality of it was absolute. He had stripped them not only of their power, but of the very narrative that sustained it. This, he said, holding up the rest of the papers in the envelope, is a petition for divorce, which I filed this morning on the grounds of adultery. And this, he produced a small, simple key, holding it up between his thumb and forefinger, is the key to your new apartment. It's a nice place, not what you're used to, of course, but comfortable. I've paid the lease for 6 months to give you a foundation to start over. It is more generosity than you ever showed me. He placed the key on the edge of the stage, a few feet from where Chloe stood, frozen in horror. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from my house. After that, anything left will be disposed of. He looked from Chloe's shattered expression to Richard's broken form. He looked out at the sea of stunned faces. He felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, no joy. Only the cold, clean peace of a project completed. The consequences are your own, he said, his voice now just a normal volume as he lowered the microphone. You built this future. He turned, gave a slight nod to Marcus, and walked off the stage. He didn't look back. He walked through the silent, parting crowd, past the open mouths and wide eyes, and out the main doors of the ballroom, leaving the ruins of the Henderson Empire smoldering in his wake. The aftermath of the gala was a maelstrom of gossip, speculation, and financial ruin. The city's elite, who had witnessed the public dismantling of the Henderson dynasty, talked of nothing else for weeks. The story was a modern-day fable of hubris and retribution, and Liam Sterling was its enigmatic protagonist. Liam, however, was absent from the ensuing chaos. He had no interest in watching the wreckage burn. The moment he walked out of that ballroom, he had closed a chapter of his life. His actions were not born of a desire for ongoing revenge, but of a need for a clean, definitive end. Marcus and his legal team handled the fallout with brutal efficiency. Henderson Industries was placed into receivership. Richard, stripped of his company and his social standing, became a recluse in his now heavily mortgaged estate. He was a king dethroned, a powerful man reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. The empire he had built on arrogance and debt had been demolished by the quiet man he had so casually dismissed. Julian Thorne vanished from the social scene. His firm, which had significant financial ties to Henderson Industries, suffered a catastrophic blow. More damaging, however, was the public humiliation. He had been exposed not as a rival, but as a petty conspirator in a domestic drama. His power revealed to be insignificant next to Liam's hidden empire. His name became synonymous with entitled arrogance that had badly misjudged its opponent. For Chloe, the consequences were the most personal and profound. The day after the gala, she found herself in a world that was suddenly, terrifyingly real. The security codes at the house no longer worked. Her credit cards, all linked to her father's now frozen accounts, were declined. The midnight blue gown and the diamonds were just costumes from a play that had ended. She moved into the apartment Liam had provided. It was clean, modern, and located in a respectable but unremarkable part of the city. To the average person, it was a beautiful home. To Chloe, who had only ever known sprawling estates and panoramic penthouse views, it felt like a prison cell. It was a world devoid of the status and admiration that had been her oxygen. In the first few weeks, she tried to fight back. She called Liam, leaving a string of messages that cycled through rage, disbelief, and eventually desperate pleading. "How could you do this to us, Liam? To me? I love you. We can fix this. Just talk to me." But Liam never answered. His silence was no longer the silence of a wounded man enduring pain. It was the silence of a closed door. He was not being cruel. He was being consistent. The marriage had been a structure with a fatally flawed foundation. He had condemned it, demolished it, and cleared the site. There was nothing left to say. Chloe was forced for the first time in her life to be alone with herself. without the insulating layers of wealth and social standing. She had to get a job. She found work as a gallery assistant, a position she was qualified for due to her art history degree, but which felt, to her, like a profound demotion. She had to learn to budget, to take public transit, to live a life where her name did not open doors. The process was brutal. There were moments of bitter resentment, of self-pity, but slowly, painfully, something began to shift. Without the external validation she had always relied on, she was forced to look inward. She began to see the woman reflected in the window of the city bus, a woman whose entire identity had been built on the shallow ground of her father's money and her own good looks. She started to understand that Liam's devastating revelation at the gala was not just an act of revenge, it was an act of truth. He hadn't just exposed his own secret power, he had exposed her profound weakness. 6 months later, on the day the lease Liam had paid for was set to expire, she sat down and wrote him a letter. It was not a plea for reconciliation. It was not a demand for more money. It was an apology. Liam, it began, I have spent every day of the last 6 months replaying that night at the gala. But more than that, I've been replaying the last 7 years. I finally understand what you meant by a flawed foundation. I was the flaw. My entire life I measured worth in the most superficial ways, and I tried to impose that broken yardstick on you. I mistook your kindness for weakness and your integrity for a lack of ambition. I did not deserve your love, and I certainly did not deserve your respect. The life I have now is the one I earned. I am not writing to ask for anything. I am writing to say thank you. You didn't just destroy my old life. You gave me a chance to build a real one. I hope one day you find a happiness that I was incapable of giving you. She sent the letter with no expectation of a reply, and she never received one. But the act of writing it was its own form of liberation. The final scene of the Henderson drama played out not in a ballroom or a boardroom, but on a vast, muddy construction site on the edge of the city. The sky arch was beginning to take shape. The massive foundations had been poured, and the first steel skeletons were reaching for the clouds. Liam Sterling stood on a temporary viewing platform, a roll of blueprints under his arm. He wore a hard hat and a simple, durable work coat. The wind whipped around him, carrying the sounds of construction, the clang of steel, the shouts of workers, the roar of machinery. This was his symphony now. He looked out at the nascent structure, a city rising from the earth, born from a vision he had nurtured in secret for years. He felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. It was the pure, unadulterated joy of creation. He had torn down a life built on lies to make room for this, a future built on steel, glass, and integrity. He had maintained his moral high ground, never stooping to their level of cruelty, only delivering consequences that were a direct reflection of their own actions. His justice had been as precise and elegant as his architectural designs. He had learned that the strongest structures are not always the tallest or the most opulent. They are the ones with the deepest foundations, the ones built to withstand the storms of life. And he had learned that true worth is not reflected in the eyes of others, but is forged in the quiet, solitary work of building a life and a character of substance. He was no longer the underestimated hero of someone else's story. He was the architect of his own. Liam Sterling's story is a powerful reminder that patience can be a weapon and dignity a shield. He demonstrated that true strength isn't about loud displays of power, but about the silent, meticulous work of building a foundation so solid that nothing can shake it. He tore down a house of lies, not with rage but with truth, and in doing so he built a future worthy of his vision. What do you think? Was Liam's response a perfect act of justice, or did he go too far? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you found it satisfying, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of dramatic justice and ultimate vindication. We'll see you in the next story.